Would you please stand as we write Royal High School's JRO2C to the presentation of the colors and the pledge this morning.
Color guard, halt, left, face.
Please put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please take your seats.
It's an incredible honor to welcome you today to our Medal of Honor Forum. Before we get started, there are a few people we need to thank in the room and highlight their contributions to this effort. This would not be possible without an amazing partnership with the Congressional Medal of Honor Foundation. I'd like to recognize Kathy Metcalf. Will you please stand, please? Their Director of Education Programming. We also have a few people in the audience who are from around the country. If you're part of the Association of Middle-Level Educators, please stand. Additionally, we'd like to recognize anybody who has served, is currently serving in the room. Please stand for a round of applause. As we start this program, I remember being here a year ago in my first introduction to the Medal of Honor Forum. It's an incredible event. The house that Ronald Reagan built that we're standing in today, or sitting in today, is no better place than to have this forum where students and adults can learn from people who demonstrated leadership and service and sacrifice. The saying that we all contribute to greater good is one that holds true whenever I think about that video we just watched and read through the book of Medal of Honor recipients that we have in the bookstore and we have signed before this event. It's a time of service, it's a time to recognize leadership, it's a time to think about how this day ties to the president this place was built in honor of. And so as we get going and have our Medal of Honor recipients come to the stage, I'd just like to have everybody close their eyes for a minute and think about this one thing. In the video, they talked about honoring those that you serve with, the people that you interact with, the people that you come in contact with. I'd just like you to think about, as you have your eyes closed as students and adults, what you can take away from today that will impact not only you positively, but the people you interact with for the rest of the day today, and maybe even the rest of the week, and maybe the rest of the month, and maybe even the rest of your lives. Just think about that for a minute. Who will that be? Who will you come in contact with where you could serve them and lift them up? Okay, as you open your eyes, I invite to the stage two incredible heroes, Americans, that I had the honor of meeting last night for the first time. First of all, bring to the stage specialist number 5, Dwight Birdwell from Oklahoma. And Staff Sergeant Clinton Romachet. And our Director of Education Programming, Megan Gately, who will interview them this morning. Thank you, Megan.
Well, good morning. Wow, it is so nice to see all of you together and here to one of my favorite events that I think we do for the entire foundation. Point of pride for us, so thank you for being here. I know we are going to be having a riveting and exciting Q&A for students and students only. So adults, I know you're enthusiastic, but we really want to leave that time for the students. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get started because time seems to go very quickly. So thank you all. Thank you, teachers. Thank you, schools. And thank you, students. Okay, and of course, I want to introduce you to my 2 friends. This is Dwight, a strawberry picker from Bell, Oklahoma. And this is Clint, a young fisherman from Lake City, California. So without all the honors and medals, these are 2 extraordinary and ordinary people who did an extraordinary thing when called upon. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is not all the grandeur, not all the warfare, but about 2 amazing people who stepped up when they were asked to, and when they weren't. So, welcome, gentlemen. We're so pleased to have you with us. It's a great honor to know you. So let's start with your origin story, where you're from, a little bit about your childhood, and what you were like as a kid. Dwight, let's start with you.
Where am I from?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about
Well,
your origins.
I was born in Amarillo, Texas. My mother was working at an oil refinery there for a while, and then moved to a ranch in West Texas where she was a cook for a big ranch. And I spent the first memorable times that I have on that ranch. And when I was 3 years old, she remarried and moved me back to the Cherokee Reservation in eastern Oklahoma. And that's where I grew up and remained until I went into the Army. I now live in Norman, Oklahoma. My home is approximately 1 mile from the stadium, and things really get lively on football Saturdays.
Great, thank you. Clint, what about you?
So I grew up in Northern California, tiny little town called Lake City. I don't know if you guys have been up that far north, but I can always brag. I grew up in a town of 100 people, which I was actually born in that same town. And if you kind of do the math, you would realize there's not a hospital in a town of 100 people. And my mom always reminds me that I cost $417.28. That was the $400 for the doctor to show up and the $17.28 for the bed sheet that I ruined getting born. But I grew up there, and we were raised alfalfa. We're ag family, so milking cows, digging fence posts. It was a place where my family had kind of originated coming on the covered wagons. 4 generations of us Smiths and Romachets were based in that area. And I grew up there, and it was at the time, it was one of those kind of boring places to be, because when you're growing up in a town of 100 people, I used to bitch and complain that the nearest McDonald's was in Susanville, California, about an hour and a half away. So I never really ever had McDonald's growing up. But it was one of those cool places because, you knew everybody, if not related to everybody either. And then I can always continue to brag that when I went to school in Cedarville, California, where the population there was 500, and I graduated in the top 15 of the 14 kids in my senior class.
Nice. Tell us a little bit about yourselves as teenagers. What were you like, from personalities to homework habits to interests, goals, activities, work ethic? Tell us about yourselves as teens before you went into the military.
Well, in the summers as a young boy, I picked strawberries during the strawberry season. Then I picked beans. I hauled hay. I helped on my stepfather's farm. And then I guess it was probably 63, summer of 63, I crossed the line after school was out into Arkansas and got a job with a poultry company, did everything from building these huge chicken houses to actually catching chickens, unloading feed trucks. And when summer was over with, the people I was working for agreed to let me work nights while I was going to high school. So 6 nights a week, I caught chickens and went to high school during the day. And by my senior year, I was wearing quite thin. But I guess the best way to cast me, for anyone who's seen that older movie, The Outsiders, I was one of the greasers, you might say. I definitely wasn't in the social group, but ran with a pretty rough group of people. I had some really, really good friends, and I'd been encouraged from the time I relocated on the Cherokee Reservation by older Cherokees to serve the Cherokee people, serve the United States and the military. So by the time I went to high school, started high school, I accepted the fact that it was my obligation to serve in that capacity. And 2 months before I graduated from high school, I joined the Army. The Army was gracious enough to let me graduate from school. Then I went in and after that began my military commitment.
What about you, Clint? Tell us about Clint at 13.
My teenage and kind of high school years were interesting. I said I always wanted to be outside, and I'll be honest, me and school never got along. I'm a product of C's get degrees. I did just enough to not get kicked out most of the time. Like I said, I liked hunting and fishing. I wanted to go play paintball. I wanted to play sports, but I did not want to sit in a classroom. That was very tough for me, so I knew all I had to do was just kind of suck it up until I could graduate. And like I said, I graduated at 17, not because I was super smart, just because my birthday's in August. And I always wanted to be in the military. I didn't know why. Initially, I wanted to be a paleontologist, but I couldn't even spell that word, so I knew that was out of the framework for me. But I also wanted more than life than, like I said, working on the ranch and farm where my granddad and my dad were. So like I said, I kind of limped through high school. In fact, I'll share this quick story. My senior year, I was getting a 12% in my senior English class. And I remember Miss Gregory was my English teacher, because I was one of those guys too, that my senior year, I had 3 senior English classes and 4 PE classes and 1 shop class. And I was getting a 12%. It was the 4th quarter. Miss Gregory came up to me and she said, "Hey, look, you've got to turn something in. You got to do something. You're not going to graduate." And I found in the library a book, a paperback covered book from Mad Magazine, A Spy versus Spy. So I did a book report on Spy versus Spy, which she didn't really appreciate. And I also told her when I turned in that report, "Hey, if you think I'm a bad student now, hold me around for another year and see what happens." And that 12% somehow turned into a C-. And I was able to graduate and kind of continue on with life, which brought me into the military.
Let's talk a little bit about you both joining the military, because Dwight, I know you had the privilege of meeting a Medal of Honor recipient when you were young. Will you tell us that story?
Well, I was initially stationed in Korea, different time zone and near the DMZ, and I volunteered to attend what was called the Advanced Combat Training Academy, and the commandant of that academy was a man named Roger Donlin. He was the first Medal of Honor recipient from Vietnam, and I remember one Sunday just before I graduated, he gave a very inspiring speech which motivated me more than I was motivated, and his words pretty well stuck with me through Vietnam and the rest of my life. There was also an Army chaplain, a native of India, who was a very dynamic individual, and he spoke to our obligations to God and country. I've never forgot that Sunday with Roger Donlin overseeing the event. But his speech and his service at the academy inspired me, and I often wondered over the years what has become of Roger Donlin. And I guess it was 2023, I attended the Medal of Honor convention in New Orleans, and he was there. And I got to see him again, and he remembered his speech. He remembered that Sunday, and we had a very nice visit. It wasn't too long afterwards that he passed away, but I feel like very blessed to have been introduced to and have known Roger Donlin. And I cannot tell you the name of that Army chaplain, but his influence from that Sunday was very instrumental also.
Very cool story. And Clint, will you tell us about how your father's and grandfather's service in Vietnam and World War II influenced your decision to join the military?
So like I said, growing up, I always wanted to serve, and I didn't really know why. And it wasn't like a pre-obligation of military service. Like I said, my grandfather had served. He'd done World War II. He survived Normandy Beach, Battle of the Bulge. My father served in Vietnam as an infantry guy, 2 tours in Vietnam with the 4th ID. My oldest brother, when he graduated high school, he joined the Army, got out. He just retired from the Air Force 3 years ago now. Second oldest brother, he was weird. He came down to San Diego and started eating crayons as a Marine. Like I said, when it came time to graduate, my parents got me luggage, so I knew it was time to get the hell out of the house. And I wanted to join. Like I said, I didn't quite know why. I just wanted to join to go kind of see the world and stuff. And at that time, it was 1999, so long before global war of terrorism. Like I said, I was 17 years old when I graduated, had this luggage, and I knew I had to go do something. And I remember going up to my dad, and like I said, growing up, I remember Grandpa Smith and Dad always talking about their time in the service, but it was never about their time in combat. It was about their buddies, the camaraderie, the shenanigans they would get into. And even though they'd been out for years and years and years, they still kept in contact with those guys. And they would pick up conversations. They might not have talked to someone in 10, 15 years, but they'd pick up those conversations like they'd just seen them yesterday. And that really impressed on me, like that fraternity and brotherhood that you can be a part of with military service. And like I said, I went up to my dad at 17 and said, hey, I've already talked to the Army recruiter. I'm going to join the Army. I'll be shipped out as soon as I'm done graduating. First duty station will be Germany. I just need you to sign. And I remember my dad just kind of looking at me, and he shook his head, and he's like, no, I'm not going to sign. And I was kind of a little ticked off, because I'm like, well, shoot, Travis got to join, Preston got to join, you got to serve, Granddad did. Why are you telling me no? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I'm the youngest of the 3 boys. This guy just wants to keep me around for one more summer of free frickin' labor. But he very quickly followed up with, hey, Clint, it's 1999. There's not a lot going on in the world right now. We're at relative peace. But if you join the military and you put that uniform on, you might have to go and do and see things that no one should have to go do and see. I said, I'm 17 years old. I think I know everything at that point. Like I said, Dad and Granddad never shared their stories of combat. I did not understand that at the time. I said, I grew up in the 80s and the 90s where Rambo and all those type of movies were kind of what you thought of the military. We had Desert Storm go on, a 100-hour war that was over and kind of done with really quickly. I had no idea what he was really talking about. So I stuck around till August, and the day after I turned 18, I signed up for the Army, and then shipped off a month or so later to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky for my first time in basic training, and then eventually on to Vilseck, Germany, where my first duty assignment after Germany was Kosovo back in late 99, early 2000. And for some of the older, not the kids, unfortunately, but some of the older adults in the room, remember what was happening in the late 90s in Kosovo and the Balkans, with the mass genocide of Serbs versus Albanians, Milosevic, all that. When I got to Kosovo is when I really got to see what my dad was kind of talking about. Right away, we were already escorting Albanians through Serbian towns, Serbians through Albanian towns, just to get fuel for their tractor, because if they didn't have a military escort, they'd be getting killed. And I thought to myself, what a punk little kid I was for taking for granted, where I used to bitch about going to Susanville an hour and a half away for damn McDonald's. But these people need a military escort just to put fuel in their tractors, to farm their fields, to put food on their table, just to survive.
Thank you for sharing that. Quick poll in the audience, because I think veterans mean a lot to us here at the Reagan Foundation and the library as well. Can we have a show of hands? Raise your hand if someone in your family, either in your immediate family or above, has been in the military or is in active duty right now. Please raise your hand. Look at that. Wow, that is incredible. It's a sea of hands from our views up here. So I think it's interesting that both of these men were sitting in your seats, basically, and hearing from elders and hearing from men they looked up to about their service, and it inspired them. So let's talk about the Medal of Honor, because we're going to get to how you both received that. And one thing I think is important that Kathy Metcalf reminded me of, and I think it's important to know, is that in order to be a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the highest military honor of valor our country offers, you have to distinguish yourself conspicuously by gallantry at the risk of your own life, above and beyond the call of duty. And I heard Kathy say this yesterday when we were at Sinaloa Middle School, saying what they're doing here is above what they gave with their oath. What we're about to talk about, a service to this country, is above the expectation of service. This is gallantry, putting your life on the line for this country beyond what is expected and asked. So just as we start talking about this incredible honor and these incredible men, that this honor is distinguished by this dynamic of being your own life is inconsequential. And if you saw the videos, if you talked to them, if you saw their specific videos, you know that they weren't going to leave men behind. When they stepped in, and we're going to talk about the fear that creeps in those moments, how do you combat that? So Clint, we're going to start with you, because I want to talk about how your military training, and in particular teamwork, and many of us out there work on teams and schools and projects, and teamwork will continue throughout your lives, young people. So how did that teamwork prepare you for that moment of intense combat in Kamdesh Base, Nuristan Province in Afghanistan on October 3rd, 2009, the actions for which you were awarded the medal?
You know, that day was just that day. It happened because of that, but it was the build-up for the almost year prior to that. It was the almost 10 years I'd been in at that point. That was my third combat deployment. Right away, like I said, growing up, like I said, I was always kind of undersized. It's always great to be 5'5" when people are shooting at you. And I realized, though, that even though one person can do so much, one person can make a difference. It's that teamwork and camaraderie that can accomplish so much more than by yourself. And like I said, as I reflect back to that day, like it was the guys like Bunderman, it was guys like Stephen Mace, it was Raz, it was Larson, it was all those other guys around me that were doing their part that made me want to have to do mine, because you don't want to let your battles down to your left and right. And it was looking back to, like I said, that 12 months of train up, building that platoon before even going overseas, building that trust. One of the big things I always liked to establish was the loyalty. When you built loyalty in with your men, like duty's gonna get them to do their job. When you tell them to, hey, go over there and stack those sandbags, they're gonna go do that. When you tell them to go execute this mission, they're gonna go do that. And duty's gonna make them perform, but it's that loyalty. And when you build that loyalty, you'll get men that will charge into a hail of bullets for each other. And it's out of that love and respect. And it was building that, like I said, over the year. And I'll be honest, some of that loyalty came from, as I like to call it, there's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things, and there's, hey, Lieutenant, look the other way while we do things. And it was in moments where at times there wasn't a perfect right or wrong answer. There was just a moment to do something. And didn't matter what the choice was, as long as you were choosing to do something instead of nothing, you built that loyalty time and time again. And that in turn built that teamwork, that trust, that camaraderie, that esprit de corps that ended up on just one day of our life helping us overcome tremendous odds.
And a quote relating to that came from Clint was, when you have teamwork driving the fight, you're unbeatable, no matter what the odds. And frankly, to me, it's a miracle these two men are here, because the odds were so stacked against them. Their survival is, on paper, impossible. So I think that quote was really important. It stuck out to me of, when you're against the odds, if you have a team, and this is what Clint is saying, you can beat those odds. And he's proof of that here today. Let's go to you, Dwight. Same question about how did you prepare for the fighting in Saigon, which is now Ho Chi Minh City, but Saigon at that time, on January 31st, 1968. And one quote I want to introduce here that came from Dwight that I think is particularly impactful to me was that he said, "I was a tool or instrument of God to save those people, the men in his unit. And it was God that saved them, but used me to do it." What an interesting way to look at your heroic actions, that you're an instrument to help others save their lives. So, Dwight, please share with us, how did you prepare or not, or how did you go into that, facing those odds?
Well, I agree with everything he said, but when I went into the Army, I never, ever passed up an opportunity to acquire additional training, and I put strong effort into learning as much as I could. I'd volunteer for schools in Korea to learn more. I don't think there's any such thing as too much training, and I also will say for the school teachers, thank you for what you do. Everybody can be a teacher, even if you're not certified and making a living doing it. There's always someone that you can share your knowledge and experience with and possibly make that person better prepared for their life and their future. But I never passed an opportunity to acquire training. And I have to say that that attitude really paid off for me. And I agree with what he said about teamwork. Without teamwork, without sticking together, you're nothing but a mob, and a mob that will soon disintegrate. So teamwork training is essential to accomplishing any mission in the military and in life. So to the school teachers, take my word, tell your students they need to listen to you.
Did you hear that, students? Okay, teachers, bring this back into your classrooms. So what stands out to me a lot in both of your stories is, I mean, Clint, you're surrounded at the bottom of a valley, surrounded by cliffs with enemies who have the upper hand. And for you, Dwight, you have enemies on both sides, your tanks roll through, and you're right in the middle. So at those points, we'll get into how you rallied after that point, but how did you deal with the emotions that came through that, the fear that tried to take over? Was it you checked out on autopilot? Did you think? Did you not think? Tell us about how you overcame that. Let's start with you, Dwight, this time.
Well, I've learned that really your biggest enemy is fear. If you let fear overtake you, you can't do anything. So that day I managed to control my fear, and in my heart I knew that if I didn't stand my ground and resist the North Vietnamese, that the whole unit of that morning would perish. So I controlled the fear, and it was difficult. I will tell you, frankly, I was scared. I was really scared. And when bullets are flying by your head and bouncing off your vehicle, that's even more scary. But I managed to control the fear, and really it wasn't me. I give all credit to God for my ability that day to control the fear, but that's how I continued to resist. The tank, the nature of the tank in Vietnam, you had to be on top of it to see your targets and what have you, so I wasn't inside the tank. At most of the time, half my lower part of my body was, the upper part was outside and exposed. That way I could get a better view of the enemy and the targets, but there was a communication device on the left side of my helmet. It was shot off. When I finally took the helmet off, it was kind of a plastic composed object, and there were skin marks all over it where bullets had gone by, but for some reason they passed me by, not disabling me. But the biggest motivator was controlling my fear and recognizing the fact that if I didn't hold my ground for as long as possible, the unit would be gone, because I was the last resisting component of our unit against the North Vietnamese.
And Clint, what about you? Tell us about how did you manage fears, emotions in those moments?
You know, Dwight hit on it earlier about that training, and in the military, it gives you a lot of training, puts you in very stressful situations to build that resiliency in you. Now, again, there's certain situations that there is no book on that you can understand what you need to do or be ready to do. But when you fall back on that training and you've already built in that kind of resiliency, and I remember going back to that day, you know, first getting woken up out of bed, everything going on, didn't quite understand really the reality of how big this attack was going to be. Didn't try to take it on all at once. It was understanding we've got to do little things at a time and just try to put one foot in front of the other. And like I said, I look back, you know, again, Dwight, you hit it perfectly. Like I said, I'm scared right now that I'm just trying not to say the F word most of the time. So if you're not running through your life, having that healthy bit of being scared, you're not really living life. But it's that fear. The fear is what freezes you. The fear is what consumes you, can overcome you. And as I would talk to my guys, I would tell them certain things. Hey, when we're going overseas, look, dead bodies attract more dead bodies. And when you have a buddy go down, and as much as you want to rush out there and try to give them aid, pull them to safety, unless you've handled the situation to eliminate the enemy, I'm not sending someone out to get you, and you're unfortunately going to have to lay there until we can figure it out. The other thing was, we're all going over, but we're all not coming back alive. That's just the nature of combat. You want to bring everybody back with you that you went over with, but the reality is, when you go to war, you go to combat, that is just not in the cards. As much as you try to prep and train, have the best equipment, good people are still going to die in the hands of terrible situations. And reflecting back to that day, I said, I don't remember being scared about ever getting shot at or not coming home to see my wife and kids. I remember just being scared beyond belief of what was happening to everybody else. Hearing the radio calls from Gallegos, from the western side of the outpost being, you know, overran, hearing the calls from the mortar position, hearing guys that were isolated and cut off, and knowing, well, I can still do something. And it's scaring the ever-living crap out of me, because the last thing I ever wanted to do, like I said, with the mindset of we're all going over, but we're all not coming back alive, one of the tactics of the Taliban then was if they could get the body of an American soldier, that was a huge propaganda thing for them. And we just heard stories with previous recipients, Sal Junta, of them trying to take one of his buddies away from him. That was scaring the ever-living crap out of me, and I don't think I could have came back home and faced the Gold Star family and told them I didn't bring their son, their husband, their father back. And that healthy fear, or that healthy scaredness, was what motivated, if we could still do something, let's do it. And it was going back to that teamwork, being scared crapless, and going in and asking for a group of volunteers, and I had 5 guys that stood up and said, we'll follow you anywhere. Going against overwhelming odds goes back to that loyalty, that camaraderie, that trust. And somehow we were able to push up, get the ammo supply point, shut the front gate on the enemy, and more importantly, go recover the 8 guys that have been cut off and isolated. But it was that healthy reaction of being scared but still doing something. Because like I said, a bad decision will always be better than a no decision. Make a decision. The best things you can do in life is fail, but try to fail forward. Don't be scared to try to take on something just because you think you might fail. The discipline of failure is one of the greatest lessons you will ever learn in your life. Embrace it.
Oh, what a great message. One thing I want to zoom out just for a second. Oh, agreed. We talked about failure actually at a brown bag lunch at Royal High School, and talked about failure is so important. Young people, it's okay to fail. That might not be what you hear, but from the 3 of us up here who have failed many, many, many times, please take that to heart. Try and fail. It's a great thing for you. So with the zoom out, and again, Kathy and I were talking about this yesterday, about this isn't one day where both of you happen to stand up for the call of sacrifice and service. That it's your military career is that this is behavior was of that this whole time. It just happened one day, enough people saw and enough bad things happened around them that their service really stood out. But their military careers are like that. And if we want to talk about really facing the odds, both of you, I mean, Dwight, you were told to leave, and he gets in the medevac helicopter and then goes out the back door to get back into combat. So same, Clint, you're recruiting people from the barracks to take on, forward progress. So to me, it is a fine line between, are you nuts? Are you crazy and heading into something that you've been told not to do? You've been told not to do that by your superiors. You've been ordered to leave. But something inside them and something in all of you is there that maybe that's where you have to decide, will I try and fail? Am I going to rally and try to take this on again? Because that's what these men did, and they're here to tell us about it. So I just want to say, Dwight, tell us a little bit about your helicopter move of hopping in to get medically evacuated, because both of these men were injured while the combat was happening with shrapnel. Dwight's gun was hit. The shrapnel went into his face and chest. Same with Clint. He's behind a generator that gets hit. And when that metal goes flying, it goes into the human flesh. But did that stop them? No. So talk to us a little bit about going through injuries, disobeying orders, which is a court-martial in the military. But here you are today on that line of making those types of decisions.
Well, what happened, the battle was still going on, and an officer ordered me to get on an evacuation helicopter, and I wouldn't do it. He got somebody to escort me to the helicopter and put me on. That escort turned his back, and before the helicopter took off, I just jumped out the other side and went back into the battle. I think I was a fair soldier, but there were times when I didn't take orders, and that's probably one reason that I got out of the Army. It just seemed like that no matter how hard I tried, the people above me and my command of me wouldn't listen to me and take orders from me. So I decided the best thing was just to move on. But anyway, I get taken to the hospital. I get checked in, and well, we're going to keep you here. And after about an hour or so, there were so many that day in the hospital. The medical personnel were having trouble attending to us. So I thought, well, I'm okay. So I just walked back to the unit, and the first sergeant just became enraged after I told him what I was doing. And he ordered me confined to the barracks, and I kept trying to go out to the field, and finally he threatened me with a court-martial. Then I left the unit area and went to a helicopter launching pad to get back to the unit, and somebody saw me there who recognized me and turned me in to the first sergeant. He personally came over and escorted me back to the unit and threatened to put a guard on me. And the next day, I sneaked off back to the helicopter pad and got on a helicopter where I wasn't recognized. And at that point, I rejoined the unit. But there were multiple times, and this is not a good practice, but there were multiple times I felt like that I had to improvise under the circumstances against orders, and most of the time it worked out, but it could have been disastrous. So the best policy is to follow orders. But I was just, I guess you might say, oddball. Maybe some people would say nut job.
And Clint, before we talk about integration for you both post-military, coming back home, I was particularly taken with your description of getting letters. And again, I want to talk about, Clint has a great story about the letters and how important they were when he was overseas. And I wanted to ask this because I think often when I sit up here and we talk about what can we do? What can you do? What can you do? What can we all do for this effort? I am not a Clint or a Dwight, nor will I ever be. But letter writing, which we all can do today, it is that easy of a step. So Clint, will you tell us a little bit about the letters, what they meant to you when you were overseas?
So I was old school, like I'm still horrible with technology and stuff, but for me it was always putting pen to paper and actually kind of collecting those thoughts and writing them out to put that physical thing in an envelope and shipping it off. And like I said, I would write people I hadn't talked to in years. My ag teacher, Mr. Euler, I would send him a letter a couple of times a week. You know, my grandma, my granddad had passed away by the time I went to, I'll share this one. By the time I went to Afghanistan, and just to kind of elevate the situation we were in, I remember writing to my grandma when we first got there, and it just said, "Hey, Grandma, hey, we're here, we're settled in at Cop Keating. You know, morale's high, the guys are looking good, we got 12 months over here, we'll be home soon, love you lots. P.S. This is a gorgeous place. Every morning I wake up and look at the mountains, and it reminds me of the Sierra Nevadas where I grew up." Sent it off, and a couple of weeks later, Grandma sent me a letter back, and the first thing it just said was, "What the hell are you doing? Look it up. Everybody knows you take the high ground." Like, Grandma knew from that one sentence that our location wasn't the best. But it was every couple of weeks or so, just to get that physical thing in my hand, and to see someone took the time, instead of sitting there jamming out an email real quick, to put that thought and that pen to paper, to actually sit there and carry it. And unfortunately, most of those letters got lost when our place got burned up. But every deployment, that was kind of my thing. I didn't want to call home. I didn't want to hear the sound of my family's voice, you know, because that kind of makes you homesick. But there was something to just sit there and put your thoughts down on paper. And of course, my spelling was bad, so of course, my handwriting is even worse. But for me, it was very therapeutic to deal with that stuff, and in times in conflict and war, and be able to shoot letters to my dad and just, "Hey, here's the situation we're in. I don't want anyone else to know about it. What are your thoughts?" And to be able to get his handwritten response, like I said, was a process that helped me.
And I read that you'd read a same letter sometimes in 48 hours, a couple times, just for that connection back home that wasn't too emotional, phone call, a voice.
Well, and that was a great thing with the letter, unlike an email. When you'd go out and do 48-hour ops, doing SKTs and overwatches, you could throw a letter in your pocket. And as you're sitting there and you got 30, 40 minutes rotating off the thermals or something like that, you could just pull that thing out, reread it, reconnect with home real quick, and then fold it back up and throw it in your pocket. And it was kind of that motivation, that little taste of home that made you really understand that, I said, you're doing it for your battles to your left and right, but you're also doing everything you did for the great communities, families, and everything we have here in this country.
And coming from a great community, maybe that's a call to action we take from here as what we can do from this moment. For all of you who feel inspired and changed, let this be a next step that maybe we do. And Simi Valley Unified Leadership, maybe that's something we take on. But let's talk about coming back home and your days integrating back to society. A lot of us know about the struggles that veterans go through, whether it's education, communication, the high rates of suicide tied to veterans coming home from combat. Just trying to get that understanding, as the people who know and love you are thrilled that you're back, but what a hard transition of perspective. So how did you both do that? Dwight, let's start with you. And how was that process for you coming home and transitioning back into American life?
Well, when I came home, I knew things were different from what I had read, but when I got home, very few people were really interested in the fact that I was home and I had served honorably, except a few veterans that had encouraged me previously. Most people truly asked the question. Some of them would ask 3 questions. Did you rape women? Did you kill babies? Did you burn houses? What did you do over there? Did you do dope? And that was just a consistent thread or stream of questions that I got. And I had some lingering health issues, so I went to the VA office or hospital in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and saw a doctor there, and he said, well, essentially he said, we don't have time for you. We've got to take care of the real veterans. And I asked him, what do you mean real veterans? And he said, well, you Vietnam guys are losers. He said, the real veterans are the guys from Korea, World War II, and even World War I. So we really just prefer not to deal with you. And from that point on, I certainly didn't go back to the VA for probably 50 years. And I quit telling people that I had served in Vietnam. I remain proud. I served in Korea. I remain proud of that. But I realized that it would probably meet with an unfavorable reception, or a reception that I didn't want to deal with. I didn't hurt anyone, women or children or what have you, other than the people trying to kill me or my fellow soldiers. And it was very offensive to me to get that type of reaction. And I think I was one of the few, probably there were quite a few, but I was the only guy that I can think of in my unit that probably didn't use marijuana. And the reason I didn't use marijuana, I grew up on John Wayne. John Wayne did not do marijuana. He did whiskey. So I did lots of whiskey when I was in base camp, thinking that that was different. But I guess you might say, if you've ever heard Merle Haggard's song, Okie from Muskogee, I was the Okie from Muskogee. Actually, I grew up about 80 miles away, but that was me.
Nice. And Clint, what about you coming back?
You know, I just want to say, for all of you kids that are here today and heard Dwight just speak about his experience coming back from Vietnam, you are experiencing living history of something that is truly special. And his experience that he went through set the way for my generation. I never came home to that. I came home to cheering crowds and a community that was so appreciative of our service. And it was because of you Vietnam guys that went through what you did to make sure that never happened again. And it is on your shoulders, each one of you kids in this crowd, to take that forward and make sure it doesn't happen. Because as my generation, I promise, that should never happen again. We got take that with you guys and make sure, like I said, as military members, you got to understand, when we live in an all-volunteer service right now. Back during Vietnam, Korea, we had the draft going on. There were so many men and women, or men that weren't given the choice. It was go to war or go to jail. Right now, when I joined, every one of us could raise our right hand and say, we will go and do. We didn't have to. No one forced us. There was no requirement. But by doing that, you give up those freedoms that when you get put in situations, when we get put in overseas actions that you may or may not agree with, you still have to go do that. But when you come home, those that are the tip of the spear should never be blamed for those that thrust it. And it is our elected officials that thrust it. I just hope to impress upon each and every one of you, though, make sure we don't ever forget what our men and women that have worn that uniform have been through, and we don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Hear, hear. As the daughter of a Vietnam vet, as the niece of a Vietnam vet, that especially is important to me. So those Vietnam vets in the audience, just know we agree and we thank you and we wrap our arms around you in this moment because of those wrongs of the past. So thank you, Clint, for bringing that up. All right, so let's talk about the actual award, which not many of us get a call from the President of the United States. Tell us about when you got that phone call. Dwight, I know for you, Dwight faced some discrimination, that he was not awarded his medal until almost 40 years after. That was a long fight. He talked about one of his commanding officers that took on the charge and said, we have to get you a medal because of your brave actions, and just hitting wall after wall of getting this man the recognition that he deserved. And so facing, I think, discrimination, which many of you out there, I'm sure, face, but in this context. So Dwight, talk to us about when you finally did get your medal in 2022 and from President Biden, and tell us about that process.
Well, it was on the 31st of May, 2022. I've been told earlier to be prepared for a phone call from a very high-ranking Pentagon official. And got the call, and it was President Biden, and he said, I want you to know, I'm going to award you the Medal of Honor. Is that okay with you? Oh, yeah, that's fine. And we talked for about 10 minutes. He did most of the talking, really all the talking. And at the end of the 10 minutes, he says, well, I've dominated the conversation. Is there anything you'd like to say? And it had been a wonderful opportunity listening to him talk. But I told him when he gave me the chance to speak, I said, I just have one thing. And he said, well, what is it? I said, you sound just like you do on TV. And he just laughed and laughed and laughed. And it made me feel good because, as I've told other people, I must have got his mind off of the serious business of the day and made him laugh. And then when I went to the White House, I felt like he just really went out his way to treat me special. He pulled me aside. We went into a room, and he had 2 documents to sign. One was a narrative of the events of that day, which led to my award. He started reading the narrative. He got about a third of the way through. He stopped, looked at me, and said, are you crazy? And I just looked at him, and he started reading again, got about 3/4 of the way through, and said, you are crazy. And I told him, well, I've heard that before, but as I told a group of school children yesterday, you're listening probably to the only person alive who's been declared crazy by President of the United States of America. That was my experience with President Biden. I could tell you more, but he was very gracious.
And Clint, with you being awarded in 2013 by President Barack Obama, tell us about that.
So, you know, after the action that day, we got back from Cop Keating, and I remember, you know, kind of right away, they already started about the awards process. And just by happenstance, my troop commander wasn't actually there during the battle that day. He came in later with the QRF. And then Stony Porters came up to me once we got back to Fob Bostic and said, hey, I heard what you kind of did that day. I want to put you in for a Distinguished Service Cross, which is second under the Medal of Honor. I remember looking at Stony, and I'm like, hey, sir, you do what you want. You're the troop commander. We got 9 more months left in country. Let's just get these boys back home. And that was kind of the last kind of conversation we talked about awards. I'd already decided to get out of the Army even prior to going to Afghanistan. So when we got back 9 months later, I started my transition process to get out of the military right away. So when I got out, I went up to North Dakota, started to chase oil fields. And in my mind, just like my grandfather and my father did, their military service, they put that in a box, they put it in the back of their mind, and they just went, putting their nose to the grindstone and starting the next chapter in life. So I was working almost 2 years up in the oil fields. Very few of the guys I worked with knew I even served in the military. They just kind of knew me as Clint. And I remember I was sitting there, I was field safety specialist at the time. I was overwatching the pipeline crew doing some work, and my personal phone rang. And like I said, I hadn't heard anything besides that conversation years and years before with my troop commander. But my personal phone rang, which was kind of weird because all my Army buddies and everybody knew called me on the work phone, so it made the boss think I was actually working if I was talking on that one. But I was kind of bored anyway, and I was like, all right, well, figured it's a telemarketer. I've got a little time. Let me mess around with this. And when I answered the phone, all of a sudden I hear, hey, this is Colonel Davis, G1 from the Pentagon. My first thought was, oh shit, what'd I do? Like statute of limitations should have been up. It's been a few years since I'd been out. And he just tells me, hey, we need you to come here to DC. We got something to tell you. And I remember telling him, I'm like, well, that's a great thing with cell phones, sir. You can just tell me over the phone. I don't have to go anywhere. And he said, no, this is something we got to do in person. And I said, well, I'm working oil fields. I don't have much time off. We're working 6-7 days a week. Let me talk to my boss, and I'll get back to you. And like I said, in the back of my mind, you know, immediately I was like, that Distinguished Service Cross or whatever Stoney put me in for, it probably got downgraded to maybe a Silver Star. They probably want me to come out to DC, shake my hand, hand me the award, and I'll be back to work a couple of days later, just like business as normal. Well, I talked to my boss and was able to get a short weekend off. They send me out to DC. I get to the Pentagon, remember sitting down, and as soon as I sat down, there were 3 posters in front of me. One was of Sal Junta, first living recipient since Vietnam. The next one was Leroy Petrie, Army Ranger, lost his right arm, saving his guys throwing a grenade. Third one was a Sergeant Sabo, Vietnam posthumous, and it was all Medal of Honor, Medal of Honor, Medal of Honor. And like I said, the Army's kind of giving their brief, and there's all this brass in the room, generals, colonels, et cetera. And I just kind of remember finally looking up, because I really wasn't paying attention. I was just looking at these 3 posters in front of me, and I called the timeout. And I said, hey, what is all this Medal of Honor stuff? And one of the generals kind of looked over, and he's like, oh, you don't know Sergeant Romachet? And so I wouldn't be asking the effing question if I knew the answer to it. I got told I got put in for a DSC, so what's all this MOH stuff? And they go, well, you've been recommended for upgrade. Short of the president signing your award, you'll be receiving the Medal of Honor. And I just remembered kind of all of a sudden, kind of just looking back down and back up, and I was like, well, for what? I didn't do anything special. I had 50 other Americans, 2 Latvians that were there fighting alongside me that day. I lost 8 guys. They never got to come home. Like, I didn't do anything more than anyone else did, especially the 8 guys that gave up their lives. And like I said, it kind of just powered down and kind of stewed on that for a bit. And it was a few months later, and then I go to the White House to go receive it. And like I said, that was a very awkward time, because I felt embarrassed back then, because I was getting acknowledged for being this hero. And in my eyes, my mind, heroes are the men that don't come home. I was a warrior fighting alongside so many other great warriors, but I got to come home, so that's what I was. I wasn't a hero. And it came to a point, right as they're reading my citation and President Obama is putting the medal around my neck, I just remember I was staring at the corner and just trying to zone out and try to be as small as possible, just trying to disappear in my own mind. And I had a moment where I kind of glanced out, and in the front row, sitting there was my family, my brothers, my dad, my mom, their kids and everything. Right behind them was the 8 Gold Star families. And just sitting off to the left was the 50 guys I served with. And I just thought in that moment to myself, man, this frickin' sucks being on this stage, but I'm not here alone, because I got all of my families with me right now, and we're doing this together. And from that moment, made me realize, as much as I don't like the spotlight or don't think I'm a hero or anything like that, I am a warrior. And we can continue to improve tomorrow better than today.
Well, as this program comes to a close, I do want to highlight, you hear what Clint says about, I didn't do anything special. Dwight has said, there's nothing unique about me. This is how they see themselves. Maybe that's how you felt. Maybe that's how you feel now sitting out there. And that's what I want you to think. If these great men can feel that way and rise to the occasion to do something great, so can you. So please join me in a standing, rowdy, big Reagan style thank you for these 2.